Hey guys, real quick before the video starts, if you're reading the title below me, then you know that today it's a compilation video of Shinta's Kamen Rider Power Rankings. Why did I make a compilation video of them? One, because I'm a moderate fan of Shinta, and two, I like the Rider Power Rankings. They're actually, well, pretty fun and in-depth. Heck, I've even made some of my own in my spare time, and so I wanted to share some of that fun with you guys. And just to make sure that he gets the credit, I will be leaving links to his channel, his Daily Motion channel, and the link to the website to where I got the content of the videos, to where I can make so I can get the clips for them, so that you guys can see for yourselves. And with that said, enjoy, and don't forget to check out his content. And that's about it. Oh, and did I forget to mention that it's like 40 plus minutes long? Holy shit. When I was gathering all those clips, I was expecting it to be around like 20. Holy shit, dude. It did not hit me that I went through like all of Showa just like that. Not to say it, but yeah, enjoy. Oh my god.
And now, for your enjoyment, a new addition to my Rider reviews. See, by now viewers of these vids have been forming opinions on the Riders and how they stack up against each other. I have as well. This, ladies and gentlemen others, is the Kamen Rider Power Rankings. I'm going to make a few rules for this. I'm only going to feature the protagonist Riders for the majority of the series, barring the legendary 7, who will all be ranked initially. I'll only keep track of the top 5 at any given time. Past that, feel free to speculate on the rankings yourselves. I'll only be examining their strengths in respect to their last canon starring appearance, so I'm not counting the 5 Riders vs. King Dark film, nor their appearances in stronger or later cameos. I will, however, count movie wars films for the Riders that star in those movies, but by the time we get to Heisei, I'll probably need to revise the rules a bit anyways. I'll make a case and leave it to the audience to make their own opinions. List updates at the end of later vids will focus more on how the newest rider rates against the others on the list, in order to justify whether they would rank and where they would if they make the top 5. The current number 1 is Kamen Rider V3. Let's face it, of the riders so far, V3 has the widest array of abilities and techniques, all of which are well utilized after learning them. With experience countering enemies on the land, in the air, and amongst the waves, the ability to briefly double his strength, reflect attacks, and blast enemies at the cost of transformation time, on top of defenses blunting the common methods of dealing damage, he has the capabilities to fight off the other riders if the need ever arises. In second is our most recent rider, X. Not to diss the first two, but an inbuilt weapon does a lot for battle effectiveness, especially against enemies which may bear fangs, claws, and other melee weapons. A resistance to bullets fired at his torso also helps secure that slot, despite none of the riders as of yet using projectile weapons. Third and fourth are a toss-up between the double riders, as many of their abilities are equivalent between them. Both are skilled fighters, having bested a wide variety of kaijin during their respective runs. However, Hongo slightly pulls ahead of Hayato in this ranking due to his better use of his skills over Hayato's preference to power. It is a close call, but overall I rank Kamen Rider Ichigo in third, with Nigo just barely behind him in fourth place. The fifth place then falls to Riderman. I'm sorry, Riderman fans, but one aspect regularly forgotten about this rider is, with the exception of his robot arm, Riderman is a human in a suit. Later riders would be humans empowered with abilities rating them as superhuman without the need for cybernetic enhancement, but for the early riders, they have body-wide changes. Compensating for such enhancements, Riderman is certainly a skilled fighter and strong, more than strong enough to take out the common mook and give a kaijin a good punch. His use of his arm's abilities, especially the rope arm, would make him a certain challenge to the other riders, but with the greater frailties of an unenhanced human body, especially as his suit does not appear to add further abilities, he would more easily be crippled in a fight against the other four. And now, the Rider Power Rankings. How does Amazon rank against the top 5? Well, against the Riders, his savage fighting style is going to be a bit weaker, as they're all used to fighting men fused with some form of creature, many bearing fangs and claws of some kind. However, Amazon has been fighting to survive all his life, so he certainly has more experience as a hand-to-hand fighter than the others, so he shouldn't be able to adapt and take advantage of the opening if he sees one. In a fight against V3, I see all of V3's gadgets giving him an edge to win. It's been shown before that Shiro can shrug off injuries that pierce his suit, and still hold strong even when bleeding out. So Amazon's usual strategy of inflicting a number of wounds to his opponent's appendages would be less effective, leading to a battle of attrition in which V3 would break out some of his 26 secrets. Against X, the deciding factor would be the Rydell. Would X be able to use it to keep Amazon's teeth away from tearing him into his flesh under his suit? Well, yes, but Amazon isn't stupid, despite his verbal tics. It's possible once the Rydell is out in its pole form, Amazon could use the rope stored in the Condor to yank the Rydell from X's grasp, and in a straight hand-to-hand fight, X would be the loser. Ichigo, Ego, and Riderman, like V3, do not have advantage of the Rydell, and would be forced to fight Amazon in hand-to-hand, something he is superior to each of the three in. I think they would have a tough time with Amazon's tendency to bite people's limbs to weaken their battle effectiveness, as the first Rider's opponents tended to go for the torso equally as the limbs on most occasions, and they would not expect a Rider's helmet to be able to open so he could chomp them down. Riderman would use his rope arm to bind Amazon, but again, with all the sharp, pointy bits across his body, it's likely he'd snap the ropes easily. So to me, Amazon ranks in at a second place on the rankings with the current group, dropping X, Ichigo, and Ego a rank, and Riderman from the list. And before we wrap up, the Rider Power Rankings. And in my opinion, Stronger tops the charts. Sure, he doesn't have the variety of abilities of V3, the savageness of Amazon, or the weapons of X. What he does have, however, is range. One of Stronger's most used abilities is the Electro Fire, a ranged attack that deals damage and paralytic shocks to his opponents. Coupled with the cybernetic implants in V3 and X, and the lack of experience against such a maneuver by Amazon during his run, it is an advantage that would lead to openings Stronger can exploit against all three in hand-to-hand, with likewise electrically charged punches and kicks. With Electro Fire generally running through the ground, it could bypass V3's red lamp power of reflection, and his V3 barrier would only ward off attack for so long. And with Stronger's ability to charge up, his attacks would become even more powerful against those involved. Ichigo and Ego have faced Kaijin with electric abilities, but their less advanced cybernetics, coupled with the lack of resistance the stress of electrical paralysis would put on their bodies, it would render them outmatched. So Nego is bumped from the top 5, leaving Stronger, V3, Amazon, X, and Ichigo as the top 5 riders from the Tachibana era. And now to wrap up the Rider Power Rankings. Against Stronger, Skyrider would lose out. I made the Pokemon jokes earlier about what flying types are weak to, and I meant it. Skyrider did not do well against Stingray Man, who had electric powers, and once Stronger charges up, his electrical abilities would be even more powerful. And we saw that Stronger could call down the thunder, so even flying away would not keep him safe. V3 has fought Kaijin with an air specialty and won. However, they tended to all fly using wings of some sort, while Skyrider is more of a glider with infinite glide time. As such, he has greater evasive ability in the air than the others. But the problem is Skyrider has no ranged abilities, meaning he would still have to get in close, which V3 would own him. Likewise with Amazon, the Savage Rider owning him in hand-to-hand. X's Rydell would give him a hand-up by keeping Skyrider at mid-range, so the only one he'd really be able to outdo out of the current top 5 is Ichigo, and I feel a bit sacrosanct at saying that. so Skyrider bumps Ichigo from the bottom of the list, and will likely be bumped in turn soon enough. And of course, to wrap up, we have the Rider Power Rankings. And in my opinion, Super 1 is essentially Kamen Rider Stronger 2.0. His elect hands can match Stronger's electric abilities, though with less variety, I'll grant you, but along with the thermal hands and the radar hands, they give him much greater ability to attack at range after countering Stronger's own ranged attack. V3 can counter the elect hands with his red lamp power, and V3 has resistance and evasion to avoid Super 1's fire blasts. But while he may be able to evade the beams, he wasn't provided a good way to defend against super cool temperatures. Plus, if Super 1 was ever to break out of the power hands for some boxing practice, I don't think even V3's special spring-hardening muscles could resist the force of an arm that can lift 50 tons. Granted, lifting something uses different muscle groups than throwing a punch, but it's a pair of gloves that allows a cyborg to lift what he couldn't before. Methinks a little leeway and rationale was intended. Amazon does not deal well with fighters that can keep their distance from him. So, despite his savagery and instinctual grasp of battle, he would initially be at a disadvantage. In addition, as one of the few riders actually trained in a martial art, Super 1's skills would be a match to all but Amazon's shopper implements, meaning overall he would end up losing out. X for similar reasons. Super 1's range advantage. And since X would lose out in a close range fight to Amazon, it reasons that Super 1 could do the same. Skyrider simply gets owned. Fly away? You're shocked or blown up by the electrum radar hands, and up close, he would easily be outfought. So Super 1 is our new top contender, and Skyrider drops off the list. As for the Rider Power Rankings, I think we'll skip the deep analysis for this one. Zeycross only showed 3 abilities: his Cross Shuriken, the Sniping Focus Bomb, and his Micro Chain. Explosives and sharp implements have been resisted well by the current ranked riders, and every rider at one point or another has freed themselves from binds of one form or another. So personally, I don't believe he would outclass anyone in the top 5. Maybe if there was more to go on, I'd have a different opinion, but I haven't been able to track down a translated script of the audio drama or the manga chapters featuring Zeycross at the time of recording this.
As normal when I wrap up a series when I do them in order, the Rider Power Rankings. How does the second to last of the TV Showa heroes match up with the rest of the riders? First off, I'm not counting the Satan Saber in this analysis. Like the Lightning Sword at the end of Super 1, it's not part of his normal arsenal, so I'm not going to add it to his roster for this analysis. Against Super 1, well, Kotaro does have a few advantages. Kotaro's transformation is shown to release a lot of thermal energy, meaning both the Super 1's thermal hands are not going to be as effective. The Power Stripes can even negate any advantage Freezing Black might give. The elect hands as well would be hindered, as even before transforming, Kotaro is shown to have an extreme resistance to high voltage attacks, something that should certainly be greatly enhanced in his rider form. So that's 2 hands down, and I'd have to take the radar hands used as missiles out too. For the grand majority of Gorgon's mutants had range projectile attacks, Black got damn good at evading. But though Super 1's ranged abilities are negated, Black doesn't have the extensive martial arts training that Super 1 does. Meaning in hand-to-hand, Super 1 would both dominate Black's more direct manner of attack, and leave fewer holes in his defense Black could exploit into an opening, which would lead to Black unleashing his Rider Punch Kick combo. So overall, at this time, Super 1 is stronger. Against Stronger, however, well, I've already explained my reasoning to Black's electricity resistance, that as most of Stronger's abilities have his electrical charge to them, they would not be as effective, and Kotaro is shown to be a bit more capable in a fight than Shigeru, who relied a lot on his cybernetics, so Black wins out. V3 is a tough one to judge, as Shiro does have a hell of a lot of abilities. V3's red lamp power would deflect an offensive use of the Kingstone Flash, but Black is more capable of evasion than the Kaijin the third rider fought. I think it would come down on where Black would strike with a rider kick, as if he hit any of V3's damage-reducing areas, he would be off balance long enough for V3 to strike back. So overall, it would feel like it would result in a stalemate. I'm giving the rate up to Black, though, as a tie with much fewer abilities in his roster is a notable feat. Black's armor providing him protection against quite a few kaijin with sharp claws and teeth, specifically the battle with the red salmon mutant, which has much longer teeth than Amazon's jaw, is why I'm saying that he'd likely beat out Amazon as well. The Jungle Rider's fighting style, being more savage than what Black was used to fighting, would make it a more even bout with him, but the Kingstone Flash could blind Amazon long enough for the opening Black needs to go for his finishers. And there is a similar reasoning with Kamen Rider X. Though the Rydell's sword form has been shown to be strong, Black's armor greatly improves his defense over that of the other riders, and fencing swords like X's are not shown to be strong in piercing armor, or that capable in slashing through anything. Suffice it to say, most of the Rydell's abilities would be rooted out one by one as well, and without that advantage, X's abilities scale down quite a lot. So, by the end of his series, Black was handily the second strongest rider of his era, knocking X off of the top 5. So finally, to wrap up, we have the Kamen Rider Power Rankings. How does RX stand against the current top 5? First of all, Black is ineligible to fight RX. In fact, I'm replacing Black with RX automatically on the list. As I believe it went over in episode 1, RX is Black. An evolved Black. A Black with better, more powerful abilities. Thus, having Black fight his older, more advanced self is not only stupid, it's redundant. As such, my reasoning for why Black would defeat stronger V3 and Amazon would still apply. Against Super 1, though, I have one word. Robo Rider. The thermal hands would be fully negated due to the power stripes even more than Black's own. The electro hands have a limited range, and Black's resistance to electrical shock would only be improved upon Evolution RX. And if Robo Rider kept at a distance and fired on Super 1 with his Voltec shooter, the Hornet Rider would need to rush straight at him into fire that has a 100% accuracy rating and ability to penetrate armor, which means, yeah, he would be mowed down. That isn't to say Super 1 could get in close early before RX form changes or before Robo Rider draws the Voltec shooter, as Robo Rider is much slower than RX's other forms, and the robotic movements would leave open opportunities of attack Super 1 could not only exploit, but use to wail on him with the power hands. But if RX got into that situation, form change for him takes a fraction of a second. Power Rider's Gel form would absorb those blows and allow him to retreat quickly. I'm uncertain on whether Gel form can be electrocuted or frozen, but we know energy and conventional weapons are worthless. Explosions are only going to scatter the Gel form until it reconstitutes, and it was shown by Helgadem that it can be blocked. Elemental attacks? Those are more of an unknown. Knowing the properties of water, it's questionable that an elemental strike would knock him back into solidity and stagger him temporarily into suffering from a rider kick. I think Bio Rider's not invincible, but his vulnerabilities are just so abnormally few. So, in very small circumstances, if RX would Bio Rider straight out, Super 1 could potentially pull off a win. But this list rates the overall capabilities, and RX's form changes are not something any of the 10 that preceded him can successfully counter with how their flexibility and changes were presented. So, RX tops the list as the strongest rider of the Showa era.
Rider power rankings? Yeah, no. Shin shows no special abilities, no powers, his strength isn't well defined, he has no finishing moves. While it appears he is smart enough to take advantage of the natural environment, it really doesn't show the character well when of his 3 fights. The first one is ended by a rocket from a bystander, the second is him killing a normal human, and the last is ripping the head off a robot. Like with when I discussed Zeycross, Shin doesn't give me enough of a showcasing of anything that would warrant me to rank him against those 5 already on the list, thus he's not getting a more in-depth analysis on why he would not rank. And as it's been asked, no, it doesn't mean that those that fail to warrant a top 5 challenge can't be ranked or end up at the bottom of the list. It just means that I do not have an opinion right now on where they fall, and I would be wasting my time saying that same thing over and over again for 5 versus analyses. If you like Shin or Zeycross, all the power to you. But in my opinion, the film didn't give me enough material to do a proper analysis for the who would win a fight argument the power rankings run off of. Rider power rankings? Yeah, this is another one I don't feel it's a good idea to give Zetto a shot at the top 5. If you look at all of Zetto's fights, he either constantly is beat down or ends the monsters in one fatal move. There's no middle ground where you can really learn how to overcome an opponent. And frankly, had he not found that exact one weakness through luck, he would have lost all of his fights. Hell, he did lose against Doris. Repeatedly.
It's only because the new organism was taken out by the bystanders that it lost enough power for Zetto to win against it. And yes, while it is true that riders have repeatedly gotten lucky in pivotal battles, it's been shown that they only got those chances because of their own abilities and skills affording them the resilience to find them, and not commonly from third-party interference. Though Stronger probably has a few contendable moments. So this time is not from a lack of evidence, it's that the evidence shows that in a straight fight, Zetto would lose against those that are currently in the top 5. No special powers and abilities, no showcasing of special skills, and he only won through luck. That does not make for a rider who should place in the current top 5.
J qualifies for the power rankings. Surprised? Well, there's one caveat. Jumbo formation is being excluded from the analysis. Why, you might ask? The thing about going giant-sized is, while you gain weight and force against your opponent, the reason you generally don't do that is you also move much slower. Your enemy becomes harder to spot, and they can still get in close to you, and in Jay's case, it makes the source of his power, the J Jewel, a much bigger target for a smaller person to hit and break. Plus, much like why the Super Sentai and Power Rangers don't call upon their mechs to deal with a monster before it goes macro, well, there's no need. The fight hasn't escalated to where you need the raw power of a giant form to match another's. So, rider rankings properly. Jay has shown a high pain tolerance and an accompanying regeneration rate, so he would be right in the range where you could give Amazon a run for his money, negating said rider's feral-edged advantages in the short term, shortly enough to find an opening. Against V3, yeah, this one's tougher to call. V3 has a host of abilities to call upon, so even if V3 can't outpower or outfight J, as we didn't see much of his martial arts abilities, I'm leaving that ambiguous, V3 has enough backup skills to fall upon to outfight J. Stronger, Superpoint, and RX have the same difficulty for J, a matter of range. Each of these riders has range attacks that can keep J at bay long enough to gain the upper hand to go for a finishing move. Even with the regeneration capabilities, there are only so many times you can get shocked, burned, frozen, or shot before it begins taking its toll. So yeah, without Jumbo Formation, Jay isn't going to be winning many Rider versus fights. But it's enough to get him on the list. For now. And now, the Rider Power Rankings. I've had a hard time writing up this specific one. And in fact, I've gone back to rewrite it a dozen times because, well, I'm trying not to sound condescending when I say I don't think Kuuga's all that powerful. While the strength of Ultimate cannot be denied, as I went over earlier, the destruction glyphs the other forms are reliant on to win were only as powerful as they were due to the chain reactions created in the Grongi's Almadam stones, which brings a lot of things into question concerning Kuuga's finishers and whether they would even work on riders without similar power cores, or would, by the time they're at the point I can judge them, be too strong. We're only shown one case of where those glyphs kill something without an Amadam, and, to be fair, it was effectively a walking corpse already, which makes for a bad example. And if the destruction glyphs don't work, we're shown many times that physical damage is not crippling. Second, Kuuga is mainly a brawler and a physical attacker, and despite the cleverness of their games, the Gronk he fought inevitably fell into three camps. Ridiculously powerful and resistant to damage, but directed without much skill, those who attacked indirectly due to disadvantages in body, or are overly reliant on a special ability to the point their other capabilities suffered. There wasn't a need to show off skill, as if he did not have the power, then he was either always physically outmatched, trying to evade those abilities, or countering with something that directly negated it through form change, and not with actual other skills. For the man who prided himself on obtaining 2,000 skills, combat mastery was not one of them. The only one of his forms that breaks the physicality trend is Pegasus, and I was amazed how many detractions that form had when on paper it's easily the most useful. Reading about it and seeing it in action was a striking contrast, as I was considering a sweep just for it until I saw how quickly it tended to be taken out, which hurts it when rider battles tend to be wars of attrition or advantages when facing stronger enemies. And despite having great range to which Kuuga can snipe things, his track record for accuracy leaves something to be desired. It's only best at extreme ranges when the target has less of a warning, At mid-range, you're close enough to see the firing so you can dodge, and in short range, Pegasus's armor is too weak to stand up to hits, as his defense, much like in dragon form, has been reduced to that of growing. Rising only lasts 30 seconds. Without it, the capabilities of Kuuga's base forms are at a disadvantage to most riders, and with it, most riders are capable of holding out in a fight at least that long. Titan and Rising Dragon would be best to use, as even though the destruction glyphs might not stick with things that aren't powered by central cores, you're going to be impaired if you're disemboweled. But again, there's little skill shown in wielding them on top of Titan being slow, meaning the more martial arts trained, similar weapon wielders, or heavily armored riders have higher odds of countering them. Lastly, Kuuga has a major disadvantage over riders who have a host of abilities and a variety of moves to call upon simply due to inflexibility. Form change can shuffle priority in his physical stats, but if he comes across something ever conceived by the makers of the belt, say, turning into water or can create an energy barrier, then that's a problem. And then there's Amazing, Mighty, and Ultimate, which are only seen for one fight each, so their capabilities are not well defined. Yes, we have statistical information, but as I went over with the Rider Kicks last episode, that data does not consistently hold up when you see the overall application as shown. There are other factors in Rider Kicks than just the force of them, and it's the same principle here. The Rider rankings are about overall capabilities judged from the evidence of the series the rider is protagonist to. And if we don't see that skill or can't easily correlate it to what is known about the rider's powers, it's going to suffer accordingly when I judge them. And sheer power is not enough. Don't get me wrong, overall he's ahead of a number of Showa riders. He beats J simply from being a weapon user, as damage tolerance can only help you out so much. And as I've said, I'm not counting J Jumbo for the purposes of these rankings. V3 is another he gets by, for the same reason several of the others have, an issue of V3's only ranged defense exhausting him. Pegasus's attacks may be easy to dodge, but V3 can't easily counter it otherwise. Stronger is difficult to judge, mainly because elemental attacks are not things we are shown Kuuga countering, and, well, we saw what happened when the Amadam absorbed electricity. While it's highly unlikely the Amadam could absorb voltage in a battle situation, as is never shown doing so, if anything, the opposite is shown. The transmuted materials are not guaranteed to be conductive, and the air bullets are not easy to counter. Super 1, as I've gone over, in a battle of skill and ability versus physical power, skill wins. Super 1 is shown repeatedly as a martial artist, and on top of that, his abilities make him a better match for countering Pegasus. The thermal hands will be able to freeze or burn through Kuuga's armored forms, as unlike with RX, they are not shown to be resistant to these measures. The radar hands, while limited in projectiles, are faster to deploy than it takes to arm and fire the Pegasus bowgun in normal mid to long range combat, and using the power hands would make it far easier to grapple with ultimates than many others I could name. RX is a sheer wipe, and people are going to get sick of me saying that. Against non-rising forms, he's physically stronger. Robo Rider, while stiff and slow in his movements, is still faster at firing than Pegasus and resilient enough to overcome mighty strikes and Dragon Staff. And trying to pierce him in those forms is futile due to how fast it is to switch to Bio Rider, which is immune to bladed weapons and can enter Gel form. Kingstone Flash, which releases an enormous amount of power, could banish even the rising form's destruction glyphs. The slippery nature of Bio Rider could easily get around Ultimate, and the Revolve Crash already aims for the torso, which puts cracking the Amadam in the exchange at high odds. Don't worry, the day RX does not top this list shall come. For now though, Kuuga ranks in at a solid third, behind RX's abilities and Super 1's skill and versatility. And knowing what I do about the upcoming riders, Kuuga will stick in the list for some time. And now, the rider rankings. How does the Rider of the Shining Evolution stack up? Now, to preface this, from here on out, I'm only going to focus the rankings on the protagonist riders. They usually end up being the most powerful due to series events, and it's rare anyone but the protagonist would show up for events requiring a fight. So let's get started. Agito's a close-range brawler like many of the Showa riders, so he's weak to ranged attacks, and any elemental resistances are unknown, as only one lord is ever shown using such an attack, and it didn't seem to do much, actually, so at the very least type matching reduces damage. And I'm doing the list a bit weird this time, as I'm stating this flat out. Agito fails against Black RX. You pretty much all knew this was coming. While he has a higher defense in Shining form than Black RX, he's only a second faster in his movements, and his forms either match his strength or are slightly weaker to Black RX's base form. Yeah, I brought Black RX up first instead of starting with number 5 to essentially show an example of why he still tops the list despite Kuuga's sheer power. Even with that form change, he can match a number of Final Form Heisei riders even before factoring in his form change. Robo Rider matches defenses along with superior ranged abilities and strength in exchange for being slower, and Bio Rider outclasses in speed even before Gel form. That is even if he could get past Kuuga, which he actually would put up a decent fight against. Even Agito's lesser forms show a fair match to Kuuga's base forms, and his preference for divining and countering blows makes for a good challenging opponent, as before Kuuga goes amazing mighty, tier for tier, Agito can decently match up if not outclass. Shining against Ultimate Form, in the end, would be a war of attrition, as by that point Kuuga's regeneration rate would be healing most of the damage that the Shining Caliber could be dishing out, while Agito's armor would be pummeled by the blows, which can potentially ignore or easily crush his armor class with the sheer power resting in them. Sadly, Agito's Achilles heel is range, lacking any form or ability to deal with true mid to long range combat. And a counter-based style, while good for dealing damage with those without formal training, can simply be picked apart by martial arts masters. So likewise, no win against Super 1. Though with his prediction abilities, it's another one Rider number 9 will be going all out to achieve. Stronger has the range to deal with Agito appropriately, but has the disadvantage of his attacks all being of an element Agito is shown to be resistant to, meaning that would be an uphill battle which, even with charge-up ramping up the voltage, he's already fighting at a disadvantage against. Add in Mystic Evolution powers at Agito's superior speed, and the strongman's not winning this one. V3 is another tough one to judge. While he has a number of advantages with his abilities, including being capable of blocking bladed weapons, which 5 of Agito's 6 forms utilize, it inevitably becomes a question of whether he can even keep up. 2 of the 6 are dual wielders, though considering a number of Agito's finishing moves require a wind-up, he might be able to bring in a reversal. But this is an overall evaluation, and Agito Shining is, again, fast. So Agito sidles in at number 4, knocking V3 from the rankings.
Speaking of the Rider rankings, and as I only do the title characters in this particular judging of capabilities, this is a wipe. I'm sorry, but Ryuki's utilization of the Advent cards is shown to be far too slow to effectively counter anyone on the existing list. His abilities are limited even by the existing count standards, and Survive doesn't exactly improve things that much. His big trump there being Strange Vents, and there's no guarantee that'll generate gear that's usable. All that he has beyond that is physical stats that set him around average for a Showa rider in base form, and half again that in Survive form. And calling Drag Rider for momentary backup in battle is his only other trump. Even amongst the other Advent riders, he's just average, and not shown to have any particularly useful other skills that could allow him a definitive advantage.
And now, the Rider rankings. And oh god, this is going to be the big one I get sent messages over. Thing is, in every argument that I hear about Faiz, it's always Axel form that's brought up. Axel form, Axel form, Axel form. That is what is needed for Faiz to dominate anyone that doesn't have a similar speed ability, especially with the nature of Faiz's Rider kick. Letting him go, Hikari ni Nare. Oh look, someone surviving Faiz using Axel form. Oh look, someone without a speed ability evading Axel form. Oh look, someone with the speed ability utterly crushing Axel form. Oh look, multiple kaijin resisting a finishing move that turns the user into a beam of light. As a reminder, Axel form is supposed to last only 10 seconds. Can he dominate a long experienced combatant in that time? One that have all, at one point or another, fought someone faster than them? Combined with the time required to even trigger all of those, it's a major hindrance, but far from one that is debilitating like Ryuki's stupid posing, and is mediated with experience in their abilities over their series. Faiz keeps things close to the chest with mastery over basic abilities and tactics in all combat ranges. A Rider Punch, a Rider Kick, a Rider Slash, a Sidearm, and advanced abilities in Blaster. What hinders my immediate acceptance of him jacking through the entire top 5 right now is his relative stats. While riders following him would have this tier be closer to common, he is still at a physical stat disadvantage to everyone else on the list by varying magnitudes, and I'm not entirely certain his technological abilities are capable of making up the difference. I have many critiques of Kamen Rider Tyson, but the results of X vs. Faiz is not one I argue with. The whole situation and reason around that fight most certainly, but not the exchange itself. With Axle and Blaster form factored in, however, it would take a surprise attack to knock any for a loop, or extended range bombardment, both of which Faiz can do, but this is an analysis that doesn't count surprise attacks. But in combination with momentarily paralyzing them with the energy construct followed that to trigger his rider kick, I could see him pulling off a victory against stronger. Photons versus electricity, I'd go with light. Super 1, however, would be a greater challenge, mostly due to his martial arts abilities and, once more, his varied skill set that I think Faiz would ultimately be on par with. Agito, however, could his attacks get through Shining Form's armor? Shining Form wouldn't be the first resort, most likely, but still, it nags at me. But with Kuuga, Faiz better hope the stronger forms do not get involved, because it was already shown a gear just slightly stronger than him kicking his ass. I hate his chances against Titan. I would not put money on any of the Risings, to say nothing about Ultimate. Black RX is what I've been alluding to, and what I keep stressing with all of these. Axle Form gives the chance, but only the chance of taking on those vastly stronger than them. And of all of those here, he has the only guaranteed evasive tactic that can elude the Crimson Smash's paralysis, going to Biorender's Gale form, but also the only guaranteed ability to thwart the photon-based attacks that would neutralize it, using the Kingstone Flash. I may keep bringing up Gel form and saying why Black RX is dominated thus far, but he does have other abilities and other forms too that make up for countering one form's disadvantages. Rubber Rider's armor, for example, certainly able to resist the Crimson Smash, as was shown with the other Orthodox hides defending against it. If Axle Form is involved, several chains of actual Crimson Smashes should be able to end anyone here, but I try not to have just one ability be the reason why a rider ranks, but all of them, and how they are used within the framework of the show. So, I'm going to get complaints in this, but I'm slotting Faiz in at 4th on the list, but only because of his statistical and gear limitation shortcomings. If his base stats were closer to a Showa rider's, or hell, Kabuto's base stats, if Axle Form had a way to reliably last longer, and if Blaster Form didn't have so long a setup time for all its effects, he would be dominating this list. And now, finally, it is time for the rider rankings, and... damn it, riders, you just had to be unspecific with the powers this time around. Here's the thing. Most of the Blade Riders remain at the same power tier, with only Kanzaki and Hajime being Outriders due to their more personal special abilities. Outside of those, the Rouse system is balanced in a rock, paper, scissors alignment of powers and abilities. But the show, despite making each Rouse card a unique power-up, makes horrible use of those Rouse powers, with less than half of them ever being seen either individually or in card combos for the team's finishing moves. Thus, despite Kanzaki supposedly having the power to stop time, we never see him do it. Thus, we don't know the full range of that ability beyond what we see the undead doing, though Rouse powers regularly are shown to work differently, or not at all like the undead in contrast. Thus, it makes him among the most frustrating riders to judge, as I don't know what works and what wouldn't with regards to his powers. From what we see, Blade is an excellent fencing swordsman in having the capability to keep opponents at range, so those lacking melee weapons are disadvantaged. He has a high tolerance for pain beyond his gear's natural defenses, and is a straight electric elemental. Jack Form enhances his agility, but suffers from him having no range attacks, though King Form raises his defenses through the roof alongside giving him a stronger sword. This all making him a very balanced combatant, though with several glaring flaws others can still take advantage of. Most of which in turn then have been dealt with by Kanzaki's mutation into a Joker, though as we saw with Hajime and the many undead they fought, just because you can't kill an undead doesn't mean you can't incapacitate them from battle. However, the Blade system's restrictions of all cards requiring a cost of a value of AP, which is only gained throughout battle, means that most of Kanzaki's abilities are blocked off until late in a fight, meaning any who can utilize their own faster without restrictions have a defined advantage over him. His enhanced versatility and defensive ability certainly makes him an even match for Agito. While stat-wise Blade is weaker, Agito's immense windup for his attacks gives Blade more than enough time to arouse one of his cards to change his battle ability even at the cost of AP for stronger ones, most pertinently Metal, Mach, and Time. And evolving to King form, since it was shown to devastate unmatched defensive ability, I feel could earn Kanzaki a win if it were not for Shining Form's own immense speed and Agito's almost clairvoyant battle ability. Though sadly make Agito get an edge up on Blade. Faiz, though, is the reverse problem, as that gear is specialized in speed and penetrating attacks that defeat beings given second life. This seems on the outset the natural enemy of gear of one powered by undead, with both of them being on comparable stat lines. I feel this one would come down to Blade's Mach or Time cards versus Faiz Axel, as Faiz Blaster is a more combat-capable final form and how it can deal at range with a jetpack and ranged guns. That Blade simply does not have good ways of dealing with beyond trying to close from range. Against Kuuga is a straight wash. As has been showcased in both canon and pseudo-canon material, Kuuga straight up eats electrical power to enhance itself, and as all of Blade's lesser form finishing moves involve thunder, he wouldn't be able to do enough damage to put Kuuga down. Worse is the King form situation, due to Kuuga's ultimate ability to just straight up ignore armor class. Super 1 gives Blade the problem of having a close range specialist who can also hit from range, always Blade's Achilles heel, especially one who can match and outdo his own electrical abilities, and with his power hands, catch his blade. And Super 1 is also faster than him, with which to drop inside his guard and not allow him the time to rouse his cards in Ace form, can hit him while flying in Jack form, and outpace him entirely while in King form. Even with all the experience with a blade Kanzaki garners, sadly wouldn't be enough against a full-on martial artist. And likewise, Black RX's form change abilities would block off most of Blade's AP-based skills from working. I'd like to say a Royal Straight Flush could overwhelm Black RX's forms, as we never see him taking that kind of overwhelming blast, but with Robo Rider and Bio Rider having augmented defenses against that, there's no certainty there'd be a win. But likewise, RX would have an immensely difficult time putting him down, because he has so few attacks which could penetrate Blade's level of armor beyond the Revolve Crash. So sadly, though I like Blade as a gear immensely, I feel on a power tier scaling he would not be up to the challenge of facing any of the current top 5. But unlike Ryuki, which was a wash from the clear ineptness of the character and system, here it's because of the AP cost system's inherent limitations to its use, and the question marks all around the full ability of his Rouse cards. Had those been better mediated and defined, he might have been able to at least outdo Faiz. Rider rankings. I'm not really doing that analytic this time since I'm doing this series out of order, and I kinda did it when touching on the Double Search arc. Double's power is in his versatility of his elaborate form change, but even once going extreme, they are only just barely stronger than Kuuga Mighty form. His greatest strength comes from finding and taking advantage of his enemies' weak points, and then unleashing the full powers of their memories, using them to overwhelm far stronger opponents than them stat-wise. But conversely, high-speed movement tends to be their largest weakness, as users of that can counter their defensive and evasionary tactics, alongside not giving them time they may need to formulate a plan, which is why most of them were ultimately defeated by Axel. So even if I were using my normal analysis of the likely outcome of the who win the fight scenario, I can tell you Double likely wouldn't end up ranking in the top 5. But as for the series